think so, but I don't know. I've pushed the button on the ship, but it still says waiting for Schmidt Ocean Institute on. Thanks everybody for joining us. This is the research vessel Falcor, and I'm going to let Hannah take it away.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to all of you joining us for our program. My name is Emily Penn, and
Thanks everybody for joining us. This is the research vessel Falcor, and I'm going to let Hannah take it away. Thanks everybody for joining us. This is the research vessel Falcor, and I'm going to let Hannah take it away.
Members of our crew and science party offshore the coast of eastern Australia, as they are currently mapping the Tasman Sea as a part of the King and New Year expedition. A little bit about this before we get started. I will be monitoring the chat boxes on YouTube and Facebook. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them there. There will be time for Q&A at the end. And with that, I would love to hand it over to Emily Penn to introduce eXXpedition.
Hi everybody, thank you so much for hosting this session. We're really excited to be able to talk live to the team on board the vessel today. Just to quickly introduce a little bit about eXXpedition and what we do. We've spent the last 6 or so years sailing to different places around the world to study marine plastic pollution. And we've been running these voyages with a team of women, different women from all over the world that come from very different backgrounds. Everybody from sailors to scientists, filmmakers, journalists, artists, teachers, designers, policy leaders, all the sorts of people that we not only need to understand the problem, but also find our role in solving it. And that's led to all sorts of other projects, such as the Ship platform, which we're going to be sharing later on today, which showcases all of these different solutions and these ways we can tackle the plastics issue. So I am now going to hand over to 2 members of the eXXpedition family. The first one, Dr. Winnie Jones, to introduce herself.
Hi, thanks for the introduction, Emily. Yeah, I'm Winnie Jones. I'm the science lead for eXXpedition, based at the University of Plymouth in the UK, and I've been leading up the latest mission around the world studying plastic pollution. And over to our ambassador, Ileana.
Hi everyone, my name is Ileana. I am from Costa Rica. I am an eXXpedition ambassador, and I was part of the voyage from Galapagos to Easter Island last February. My work is focused in uniting creativity with ocean conservation and creative consultant in design and communications with marine conservation and geo. Very happy to be here.
Hello everyone, I'm excited to join you all today. My name is Jessica Leight-Marnis and I am an artist who works sculpturally with marine debris rope. I'm super excited to be the current artist at sea aboard Falcor. And over to Daria.
Hi there, I'm Daria. I'm co-PI on the current voyage of Falcor in the North Tasman Sea, and also a crew member of eXXpedition on the first voyage that was affected by the pandemic. And I'm really excited that we're actually having this connection and call here today. Yeah. So what I'll do now is I'll be showing you the area we are in at the moment. So Falcor has been mapping for the past 3 weeks offshore Australia, so the east coast of Australia, and we are between the Coral and the Tasman Seas, and that white region there, or the colourful region you see, is what we've been mapping in the past weeks. So as you see, a lot of the sea floor is uncharted, and what we are doing here is to add high resolution data to that map, and that's part of a global effort to map the ocean sea floor by 2030. So this is the research vessel Falcor, seen at sea. It's a 83-meter long vessel that is equipped with the latest technology and skilled technicians and crew on board. Falcor also has a remotely operated vehicle, Sebastian, that you could just see being dropped there, deployed to take footage of undersea features, for example. That's how they discovered the world's longest animal. So, as I said, Seabed 2030, that's the global initiative, and this first voyage in the new year is actually contributing to that global effort. This is us on the current voyage. In the science control room, you see a lot of screens where we can see data come in real time. And Debs, maybe I just get you to pause here before we take a little tour of the ship. So just to give you a little bit more context of Falcor's expeditions around Australia, due to the pandemic, Falcor has been mapping around the coast of Australia, partly in shallow waters, but also deeper waters. And as part of these operations, I've joined Falcor just recently, mapping the Coral and Tasman Seas as part of the science team. And this is where the connection with eXXpedition comes in then. We've done some opportunistic sampling on board, last minute effort to gather the equipment to be able to use the ship's underway water system. So the ship takes in water from the hull, seawater, uncontaminated seawater. We filter it on board in the wet lab. I'm just going to go down there, the corridor, and show you also the CTD rosette that we're deploying to measure conductivity, temperature, and depth of the ocean. And we're able to sample at different depths the deeper parts of the ocean. So this is our wet lab on board. You'll see there in the sink we have different types of sieves. Here we're sieving the seawater that comes in from the underway water system. The sieve that we're using has a mesh of 125 microns. And then we have capability of storing samples and any zooplankton, for example, that comes in our samples as well. Here is the CTD. And I will show you how that looks when we actually deploy it. So this instrument is able to measure conductivity, temperature, and depth, and we're able to fire so the bottles can be opened at different depths in the ocean, so we can get a idea of the water column. And then after a certain time, so our deepest dive in this case during this expedition was 4,500 meters. And after a couple of hours, the CTD then comes back. We take it back on board, and what we do is that we filter each of the bottles from different depths for looking for zooplankton and potentially microplastics. So it's just being hauled in there, gets back on board. The crew help us to set it all up for the sampling, and here we are. Just after it gets back on board, we basically open the bottles and let it flush through our sieves to then examine in the wet lab under the microscope. And we work in shifts during this expedition on Falcor, so everybody gets some hands-on experience. We're joined by students so that everybody is involved. So even though the science party sleeps at times, the science never sleeps. And this is Jess and I in the wet lab, basically sieving. So what we do first is take the seawater and filter it, and with a pump we extract the water. And then what we're left with is the filter with the sample that is, in this case, from the Niskin bottle from the CTD. And we do this twice a day. And we just make sure that during the collection of these samples, there are no other operations that could compromise the quality of the sample. So this is the sample under the microscope. This is one of our CTD samples we collected, and what you see there is on the top is a zooplankton, and then you can see some fibrous material in there as well, which may be potentially microplastic. So the aim after this current voyage is to take these samples back to the lab and analyze them to make sure we can distinguish between organic material and plastic fibers. All right, and then as part of the science crew, we also give seminars at sea where we basically talk about our research, but also passions like, for example, microplastics, and in my case, being a crew member of eXXpedition, while also having that other hat of being a scientist at sea for the current voyage. All right, I'll hand over. So the next person to take over is Winnie.
Thanks. Sorry, talking over you there. So eXXpedition conducts a range of different sampling. Here we've just thrown in our manta trawl, and this looks at plastics in the surface of the ocean. We are sampling a range of different areas, both coastal water, some offshore areas, and we also have sailed through some of the oceanic gyres. So these are these large accumulation zones of plastic that, due to the ocean currents, they trap plastics in these regions. But I don't know if we can pause this video at all here for a moment. So whilst whilst we're on board, we are collecting these samples to look for plastic pollution. Here we can see the FTIR. So just as Daria was saying, they're looking for the different types of plastics or even organic material. That's exactly what we're doing here. We've got this instrument on board, and it allows us to look at the different particles that we find in different samples. We'll come on to some other types of sampling that we carry out, but we can analyse all the material that we find in the surface water to make sure that it is actually plastics, and what type of plastic, because understanding the types of plastic allows us to identify the sources of those, and then ultimately come up with the best solutions to combat those plastics. So for example, we've been finding a lot of polyethylene. So this is used widely in food packaging, plastic bottles, etc. So we can then target those kinds of areas to affect change. So yeah, here we are analysing. You can see that tiny little particle being placed on there. And this really allows us then, as I said, to come up with the best types of solutions. As we're sailing through, we also carry out subsurface water. So just as Schmidt is looking at the ocean depths with their Niskin bottles, we're looking at that as well, because we know that not all of the plastics in our ocean stay at the surface, but a large proportion will actually sink down through the water column and end up on the sea floor where there's nowhere else for them to go. So we carry out sampling. Here we've got a Niskin bottle that you can see, and we filter that water on deck. So there they are, just attaching a hose to the bottle, and that's filtered through on board that they're doing there. you might have noticed that cover, that aluminium foil cover, and that's just to prevent any contamination from us, from our clothes falling in to our sample and being miscounted. And then finally, we are looking at sediment to see, as I said, this plastic will settle down through the water column and down to the seafloor. So the final part of that puzzle is looking at the sediment and seeing how much is down there. So we use this grab, as you can see, and we're just taking samples of the sediment to analyse. And that's done back in the lab at the University of Plymouth. So I'm busy analysing those samples at the moment. The work does not stop back on land to try and see what all of those samples are that we've collected and find out all of that data. So that's our science programme in a nutshell. We do also, which we haven't shown, conduct surveys on land, because we know that's the start of the journey of plastic. It comes from us on land and enters out into the ocean. So we carry out city surveys and beach surveys to look at the litter that we're finding in the street and see how that might relate then to the coastal water and the offshore water to get that full understanding of the plastic pollution in our environment.
Thanks, Vinny. I'm wondering, in terms of the samples, do you see more plastics in the surface waters compared to those samples you're taking with the Niskin bottles at the subsurface?
Yeah, we are finding a lot more in the surface water. A lot does float. A lot of plastics have quite a low density, so they'll float on the surface of the water. And of course, the sampling methods, in the surface, we're towing this net. So we're sampling a really large volume of water, as opposed to the Niskin bottle. Same with your samples. You know, it's a set volume, so you can only get a kind of smaller water volume and a smaller sample. But it does allow you to look for much smaller microplastics than you can find in the manta trawl that are slightly larger. So you get the slightly different picture. But we are finding plastics similar to what you showed, the fibres, mostly things like polyester and polypropylene that are sinking down through the water column.
Great. We've been finding a lot of blue fibres, and we're wondering, like, is that in terms of what's in the ocean, do you have any idea of what the most common material is? You did mention the material that comes from plastic bottles, which I would imagine a lot of it is transparent, but a lot of the things we found are blue fibers. So I'm wondering whether you observe something similar.
Yeah, we do find blue fibres, and we are really careful that we take samples of all of our ropes and anything that we might have on board that could potentially, contaminate these samples. It's a really key thing to be aware of, to make sure that we're not, making the wrong conclusions from our data. But as you can see in our picture, we actually have a lot of yellow ropes on board, and so that precludes any form of blue fibre contamination from our samples. But yeah, we do. And particularly in the surface waters, we are finding a lot of white and transparent polyethylene plastics.
Yeah, and I think from what I understand, you also do air sampling, so any microplastics that might be in the air, which we're doing here on board as well in the wet lab. And it seems there is no contamination on board from those sources. Great.
Yeah, you always have to be really careful. But yeah, we're analysing air samples as well. And actually the microorganisms that are living on some of the plastics that we're collecting from the water as well, to, as I said, to build up this full understanding of the interactions as well of marine life with plastics.
Great. So I think the next person will be Juliana. to tell us a little bit more about her her time on eXXpedition's leg 7, I believe. Oh, sorry. It's actually Jess first, who is our artist on board.
Yes.
Hi everyone. So up on screen we have a little clip which has been shot on board Falcor, and it's been a fascinating experience for me just learning more and more about what's going on beneath the surface of the ocean. We see these amazing landforms, and from the scientists on board I've been learning about how these may have formed over time, and this has been really fascinating to me because I'm really interested in the sculptural influences on the surface of the Earth, whether that's from human origin or from these underwater systems and natural systems. So you can see also that we can perhaps pause for a moment, Debs. The material that I'm working with is primarily marine debris rope, and that has been collected from coastlines around Australia. So this is sort of where the conversation comes in around our human influence on the surface of the Earth, and sort of how we're potentially changing these natural systems. So in this piece that I'm currently working on screen, I'm really just merging these ideas of form and landscape and sort of reflecting on these hidden processes and what that might mean for us as humans influencing the rhythms of nature. So here we go, back in action, and this is where I'm working on board Falcor, and it's really an inspiring space to be working out of, and to be working so closely with the marine scientists on board, and also sharing this work with the crew. And I think the beauty of art as a communication platform is it really invites the viewer to have an experience, and it's not me telling someone how to think or feel, but it's really just sharing how I'm viewing the world. And I think art has that potential to change the lens or challenge the lens through which we see. So I imagine, Juliana, you've had a similar sort of experience, and perhaps your time aboard the eXXpedition vessel has also sort of informed similar thoughts, and also how you sort of communicate that experience out to the world.
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
I can.
Yeah? Okay. Yes. So yeah, my experience with eXXpedition actually goes very well with the slogan of making the unseen seen, because I think everybody has this concept of plastic, of the typical island in the middle of the ocean. And I had the opportunity to go through the South Pacific Gyre. We went through from Galapagos to Easter Island. So it was quite impressive when we were all very expected to be able to go through it. And once we were there, we even had like the most beautiful, pristine ocean. Blue, perfect, no plastic inside. But then at the end, it was very interesting to see that even in our, like what the samples that we could count, like the plastics that we were seeing, there were more, but they were of course microplastics. Like this whole problem was shifting, was changing, and it was also just very interesting to see every single one of us, how we experienced the whole process through like our different expertise. From my side, I have been working in conservation, in ocean conservation, and one thing that I realized is that not everyone, is very few of us who have this amazing opportunity to be in the middle of the ocean and be so close to the ocean. Actually, even if we're there, we might say that we already have this notion that we're so connected, but it's once you're there that you see it, you feel it. And it's like through art, like through your art or through design, what I try to do is to bring that into everybody's life, or try to communicate it in a way that everybody can understand it, or can even or translate the science. While I was on the boat, Winnie was our guide, so I was the one. I chose to go more to the science part instead of the communications side, so I could experience the science more and understand it more, and then try to translate that into my work, everyday work, and also to everyone afterwards. I feel like by sharing these experiences, you're also empowering more people, and like breaking stereotypes that women can be out there at sea on a boat doing science, which I think is quite a big stereotype that we're all breaking here.
So true. It's so important. I think it's highly important that everyone sort of recognises, finds a way to find their place within this sort of issue, and recognise that we're all empowered to make change in our own different ways. And I think the beauty of us on board Falcor and your team also is that we've got these disciplines coming together, and that's when really exciting things can happen, because we're sharing information and creating dialogue and merging worlds, and just never know what can come from those things, those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's really nice to see how both eXXpedition and you guys also combine science and so many other expertise, and seeing creativity and art and design, like being more present, is really important. I remember when I was studying design, I was already thinking, how am I going to help the ocean? And then now we're here, and we can see that we all have a place in this, which is really, really amazing. And we can hopefully inspire new people to do it.
100%. And I think that feeds in really nicely to the next piece, which is your Shift platform. And it's really just by sharing ways we can all be involved and use our different skill sets is really sort of empowering and exciting. And I'm really inspired by the work you're doing in that space.
So just real quick before we go, I am going to ask Jess a quick question. We have a question from Bettina on YouTube. Jess, where will we be, your amazing artwork, Jessica, where will we be able to see your creations beyond the voyage?
Good question. Well, I do have a website, and I also have an Instagram page which sort of has up-to-date current sort of happenings, so you can follow me there. But from this voyage, I'll be using all my inspiration, and I'll be working on a new body of work that I hope to exhibit at some point at the end of this year. So that will be a little bit dependent on the state of the world and how things evolve, but I'm excited to really bring this thinking that has been inspired from this voyage and bringing that to life and realising that in a physical space that everyone can experience and have their interactions.
Great, thank you so much. And Juliana, just a quick question. We have another person on Facebook, Antonella, asking, I'm a marine biologist. How do I get involved in this sort of work? Can you just talk real quick, or just maybe answer in the context of how did you get involved with eXXpedition, and maybe if people are interested in getting involved in these types of projects, what they can do to do that?
Mm-hmm. Well, my path was into conservation was like 5 years ago. I was just very keen to transfer my creativity and my skills into conservation, and I realized that there could be a loophole for me. So I did a master's, and then I've been working with marine conservation NGOs, and then as you get involved in the subject, you start finding all these amazing initiatives, and that's how I found eXXpedition. In one transition from living to Asia, coming back to this side of the world, I applied, and I was very lucky to be selected. And just building up your skills, I guess, to be, I guess, like stand out in the. But then, as a marine biologist, I think you're already one step ahead.
Great, thanks so much, ladies. I think we're gonna shift over to Shift. Take it away, Emily.
Great, yeah, thank you. If we just pause the video for a moment, I just wanted to introduce, I suppose, some of the real themes that eXXpedition works around. And so we've obviously talked about the scientific element, which is such an important part of really understanding the problem, and for us particularly the true sources of the plastics issue. The second of our three pillars is really about storytelling and communicating, and I think Juliana and Jess just summed that up so beautifully about how they've used their unique skills to be able to take this message to a wider audience. But our third and really important pillar of what we really do is then about translating all of this into action and building this incredible community of change makers around the world. And that's a huge reason why I really wanted to set up our voyages perhaps a little bit differently than traditional scientific voyages, where it is about taking people from all different sectors of society to understand a problem, because we realise that we need everyone part of this sort of army back on land creating change. And I think that's really what makes what we do kind of quite unique. And also I think in this moment with COVID completely upending our plans to sail around the world and making us firmly landlocked for the time being, it also means this shift to working on land and the change that we can really impact right at the source of the problem here on land, which is really where it all begins. That's become very much a huge part of our focus. And when we start to look at that, though, all of those different actions and all of these different amazing solutions that we have to tackle the plastics issue, I think it's easy to become quite overwhelmed quite quickly. So if you start the video now, I'll kind of show you what I mean. But all of these cards kind of scrolling here in this video are hundreds of different ways that we can solve the issue. And so we realized that we actually needed a tool to try and help people navigate all of these solutions. And so we built this platform called Shift, and you can find it at the URL shift.how. And it has all these different opportunities, but it also a set of filters where you can actually start to separate out some of these solutions by choosing which area of life you might want to take this action, and how big an action you want to take, and how close to the source you really want to go. Once you've chosen then something that kind of takes your fancy, you can flip over that card and look at the pros and cons of working on that solution, because ultimately there is no silver bullet to tackling the plastics issue. But the great news is there are hundreds of things, and we just need to think about what's our superpower, what's our area of opportunity, and where does it intersect this problem that we all care about, and turn that into an opportunity to really make a difference. And so that's why we took the opportunity in lockdown, when we were all chained to our desks, to do something useful with that time spent on our computers, and turn this virtual tool over to the world to say, have a go, have a look at where you can have an impact, because we really do need all of us who are taking actions every day to be able to solve this issue of marine plastic pollution and the many other ocean challenges, which you guys for sure out there at sea right now are going to be seeing are really having an impact, but we can all be part of it. So thank you so much, Juliana and Jess, for really kind of sharing the ways that you're having an impact as well. So I think we've got a few minutes left that we're going to go into some questions. Have we got any more questions yet coming in?
We do not yet. So just another call to the audience on Facebook and YouTube. If you're watching, please ask us questions. If you have any questions for somebody specific, just go ahead and ask that question. If you have general questions about eXXpedition or Schmidt Ocean Institute, please feel free to reach out. And maybe Daria, you have a question for one of the team members. We can kick that off while we're waiting.
Great, thanks, Debs. So just generally to everyone, maybe, since we're now also entered just in 2021, the UN Decade of the Oceans, and you know, conserving our oceans, the world's oceans, and a lot of the our food comes from the ocean, and for example, zooplankton is at the bottom of the food chain, and we just need to really be making the unseen seen. I was wondering, for you personally, in terms of New Year's resolutions, whether you have one shift action item that you can relate to and one change you want to make this year, on top of all the changes you've been making over the last years in any way. But is there one solution for you this year? Emily, maybe to start with.
Yeah, it's a good question. I've obviously been thinking about this for so many years, and over those years made a huge number of changes to the way I eat, the way I shop, the way I wash. You know, it literally impacts kind of every corner of our lives. I think, you know, going into 2021, for me, it's maybe less about those daily actions that all add up that I've been working for so many years on trying to, you know, trying to kind of do, but maybe more to the bigger picture for me this year about trying to inspire as many people as possible to use their superpowers, and to really empower people to realize that micro actions matter. And that we're only going to be able to solve this problem if we're all working on it in our own way together. So I think for 2021, for me, it's probably bigger picture. I don't know if Winnie or Juliana have any very actionable things that they've managed to implement so far this year.
Well, for me, similar to Emily, you know, I've made a lot of changes in my life over the years as someone who has been researching plastics for the last 6 or 7 years now. And, you know, I see the impact of that firsthand in the oceans around us, in animals that I'm researching, and see their stomachs full of plastic that, you know, ultimately all come from us, from humans. So yeah, I was going to also say that using my superpower, which is science, and being able to conduct this research, trying to use that and the data and the evidence of the research that we're doing with eXXpedition to try and take that to the people that need to hear, the policymakers and the industries and all of the other sectors that we work with, to try and bring the biggest positive change.
That's great, guys. I think everybody is really trying to have as big of an impact as we can. We have a few questions from Facebook and YouTube. If I can jump in, there's a question from a viewer. Are there any places microplastics haven't reached the ocean yet? I'll just kick it out.
Shall I jump in on that one?
Sure.
Yeah. So from our research that we've been doing, you know, we're basically finding microplastics and larger plastic as well in everywhere that we're looking, from the Arctic all the way down to the equator, and then down into the Antarctic. Recently, members from my research team at the University of Plymouth just published microplastics on the summit of Everest, but we're also finding them all the way down to the deepest parts of our ocean, down to the Mariana Trench, more than 10 kilometres deep. So really, unfortunately, the impact and the fingerprint almost that humans are leaving behind, even in this these remote and what you think of as very pristine areas, is still felt. So unfortunately, all the places that we've been carrying out research so far, we are finding microplastics.
Yeah, maybe that's something where I can jump in as well in terms of my research. I research deep sea trenches. That's where the earth recycles itself in subduction zones. And when I saw the first images of the plastic bag that was found in the Marianas Trench, I was quite shocked. And it turns out it's actually not, you know, we found it in all the deep sea trenches. And just recently, last year, this time, I was on a really remote expedition for 2 months in the Southern Ocean. And as part of that research, we were dredging up rock samples from the seabed. And there we had a small piece of plastic we found in the most remote part of the planet. We were about 3,000 nautical miles away from the next port. Yeah, we were finding plastic in some of those deep sea dredges. And that's where I could then tie in my passion, my research passion for more from the geology side, looking at deep sea trenches, at volcanoes and the Earth system, but then a bit more bringing in a bit more societal relevance of the work that we do as Earth scientists as well, working in the marine realm, really. So that's when I really realized we have a massive problem. And part of the problem, I think, is because it is invisible to the human eye, we need tools to make it visible, and we need to communicate our findings well illustrated to the general public. And I think more of that is happening in recent years.
Amazing. So there's another question. What are the challenges of microplastic research? So maybe Winnie, you can take this, and then Daria can follow up again.
Yeah, sure. As we know, a lot of our clothes and the products that we use are made of synthetic materials, so plastics. If you look at the label of your clothes, it's likely to be polyester or acrylic or nylon, which are types of plastics. So we have to be really careful that we don't contaminate our samples with things that are coming from us. So on board eXXpedition, we take a number of different precautionary measures. As you saw, the foil that was covering that filter funnel to make sure that nothing in the air or around us is falling in. A lot of the samples we seal up on board, and they ship back to the University of Plymouth, where I analyse them in a sterile, clean lab that has a positive pressure, so the air inside's actually blown out, so there's no way any dust or anything can get inside. So it makes it a super clean area to make sure that we're not contaminating our samples. So that's on a practical level what the challenges I would say of researching microplastics are.
Yeah, and similar here on board Falcor, of course, some of the materials that we're using, because plastic is so durable and so versatile, a lot of the materials that are used in our everyday lives are made of plastic. And we've been trying to eliminate contamination on the ship, so the water comes in from the ship's underway system, and then going through tubings into the wet lab. But then, of course, naturally, some of the equipment we are using is made of plastic. For example, I mean, microscopes, the hard hats we are wearing, but we want to make sure that we can kind of eliminate as much as possible. So we've been sampling the air, and for microplastics, we've been very careful filtering only with metal sieves. And the one plastic device we have is the basically where we suck out the water during the filtering process, which is a particular type of scientific plastic which we could track back if there was any contamination from it. And the same goes for the Niskin bottles. Essentially all the tubings of sampling there as well. We're trying to be very, very careful, try to wear clothes that are made of cotton rather than plastics, different types of plastics. So we've been paying attention to it, but because it is because the particles are so tiny and not visible to the human eye, it's always going to be a challenge.
Great, thank you both. So it doesn't appear that anybody out there has any more questions. Is there something else that you all would like to discuss specifically between yourselves on your research or the I'm going to kick it back to all of you if there's something else you want to add. One more call to our viewers on YouTube and Facebook. If you have questions for our panelists, now is the time to ask. Here's your opportunity to be involved in this microplastic conversation.
I actually have a question for Daria and for Jess. I'm curious now, you've been at sea for a little while. Do you find that this voyage and maybe anything that you've seen on your trip so far, has it kind of sparked something for you that you think, actually, when I get back to land, I'm going to do something differently, or I've got a real ambition now to do something, or someone that you've met or a conversation that you've had while being on board?
Yeah, actually what we do as part of our science team here as well is to do marine mammal and bird observations, and I've learned personally quite a bit about seabirds, which is one of the systems that is really affected by the plastics problem as well. So we've seen all animals being tangled in fishing ropes, birds specifically digesting taking up some of the plastic and then dying because they can't process the plastics. And what I've seen and through conversations with the bird observer here on board, I've realized that actually marine birds are particularly impacted, and they're also really good messengers of environmental change. So I think we need to look at different parts of the system and listen carefully to what some of the marine organisms are telling us and get these signals, because they're feeling the pressure quite early on, where we are kind of, in a way, at the surface. They have a much, because they're so exposed to it, they're so closely linked to the ocean that we need to listen carefully to different parts of the system. So what I will do when I get back to land will be more local actions along the coast that I live on. And I'll be participating in the eXXpedition's Eastern Australian virtual voyage, which I'm really very much looking forward to, and connecting with people on land to basically shift our behaviors on land, look at upstream solutions before the plastic even makes it into the oceans.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just really reinforced some things, that the world is this huge, extraordinary, fascinating place, and we're just so lucky to be out here exploring it and learning from it. But at the very same time, it's also highlighted how small and interconnected the world is via our oceans, and also just how important they are for not only our health, just the health of the planet and every living thing. So for me, it's sort of really that duality is in stark contrast. It's huge and it's very small, and I think that's something that's, for me, also I find really a valuable insight, because it also is very true of our own human interconnections. You know, we're so many people spread across this giant planet, but everything we do and every inspiring and positive action we take can also sort of inform and inspire others. And you know, sometimes it just takes a few little actions and really create a massive flow-on effect, and that to me is inspiring. And I'm also so inspired by just the different kinds of work that everyone is already doing. It can feel so overwhelming sometimes. This problem is pervasive, the microplastic is everywhere, but so too are the solutions, and we have so many people working in their different fields, and I just think that is incredible.
Thank you so much, everyone. We have 3 questions that have come in from our viewers. So I'm going to start with the question, is there any chance any bacteria or other organism could consume plastic harmlessly, or is our challenge to stop plastic entering the water?
Yeah, I can hop in again here. So we know that there are about 900 different species that interact with plastics, and a large number of that is those that actually ingest the plastic, so consume them. The range of impacts that that can cause are really, really varied, from, in the worst case, blocking its digestive tract and killing it, or much more slow effects like altering its behaviour, altering its reproductive system, altering its hormones, altering its feeding and its metabolism, so it has less energy to spend on growth and rearing its young. So there are a whole range of impacts that can happen from animals ingesting plastics. But we also actually find that some organisms aren't impacted so much. And it's quite a challenge to kind of understand that range of impacts and the risk of plastics to organisms that actually ingest it. But either way, having your stomach full of plastic is not going to be particularly beneficial to anybody. I definitely wouldn't want mine full of plastic. So, you know, it's us that are creating this plastic, and it's us that have the power to stop it. And we know that when it gets out into the environment and fragments into these smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, it just becomes so much harder to clean up. So really, it is down to us to reduce and prevent as much plastics from going into the environment as possible. That would be my take on it. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add there.
Yeah, very much agree. Thanks, Winnie.
Yeah. And I think we have two more questions. I'm going to kind of merge them together because I think it's a good place for us to kind of end. But so I'm going to read off the two questions, but I think you guys will find that you can kind of answer them together. How will microplastics in the ocean now impact our ocean in the future? And when confronted with a massive environmental problem, where do you find hope and inspiration? And so I think this really lends us into, you know, a bit about what we were talking about with Shift and what we all can do and how individuals can take on a small piece of a very large problem and collectively all help to become a solution together. But I will open it up to the panelists to all answer this from each of you as your kind of final thoughts on our oceans, what we can do to help protect them, and your places that you find inspiration for what we're doing. Emily, do you want to start?
I think from my side, absolutely. Yeah, for that second question in particular, you know, where you do find that hope and inspiration, because I mean, it's such an important question, because of course, some of the stuff that we have talked about today, you know, it can be a bit depressing, what we're dealing with and some of the things that you guys are seeing out there. And so it's so important to keep ourselves excited and motivated to tackle these huge problems. For me, I've always found that hope and inspiration in two different places. One has certainly been the people around me, this amazing energy that you kind of get from others when you find someone that you click with because you both care about the same thing and you want to do something. And you have that sort of feeling where you wake up in the morning and you just got to get out of bed to just start tackling the day and start working on the thing that you care about. And that's always made better when you've got people to do it with. But the second place that I find my inspiration is absolutely when I'm surrounded by that incredible raw beauty of nature and the natural world. And for Daria and Jess, who are, you know, out there right now, you can go stick your head up on deck. Should be sunrise, I think, quite soon, and you know, see that amazing magic of the light hitting the water and the stars at night, and just feeling like you are there on this amazing planet. And you know, for me, getting out into nature, out of these concrete boxes that we all live in, and reconnecting and reminding myself why I do what I do is really, really important as well.
Yeah, very similar for me as well. And I think in terms of the question that relates to what is going to be the state of our oceans looking ahead, I think it really depends on the actions we will take on land. And there are there are best case scenarios, and there's always the business as usual scenario. And the business of usual scenario is very, very depressing. And I think just makes it so clear that we need to take on action on land as soon as possible. And I think also with the Decade of the Oceans that has just started, the UN Decade of the Oceans, I think we will be learning so much more about the marine environment, that people will hopefully their perception of the ocean will expand beyond what we see at the beach. So we are out here hundreds of kilometers out at sea, and a lot of the work we do is actually making the bathymetry, so the topography below the sea surface, visible. So these are underwater landscapes that we're discovering here that haven't been mapped before. So if we make those things visible and we can show the ecosystems that really depend on those marine environments, then we can, I think, shift people's perception that the big blue out there is actually very, very fragile, and is very deep in a way as well, that we can that we need to protect it, and that it's part of our natural environment that we are part of. We need to start seeing ourselves very much as part of that environment. So our actions do matter, no matter how small they are, and we need to continue making the unseen seen in this case.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Emily sort of said in terms of that enjoyment, celebration, appreciation of nature. It's so important to just stay energized and jump into the ocean wherever you can. If you're in a city, appreciate a bird on a branch or the sunset, and, you know, keep that sort of awe and inquisitive mind, you know, active. And I think that really just gives us that motivation, or it gives me that motivation too. So I think taking the time to come up with solutions and contribute in your way, but also don't forget to actually enjoy being part of the natural world.
I want to chip in and just say that, like, these big problems such as plastic, I think needs like big, bold solutions, and these cannot be achieved on our own. So just like this community that we all have in our own little bubbles that now we call, can just, like with our passion, it's not everyone that has a passion for the ocean, but I felt in my experience that through my love for the ocean, how I do all these weird things that people think that I go out to the sea, and like for us it's quite normal, and it's like, oh, I want to be there, but it's not the same for everyone. And I just found through life and through my path through that I've seen friends being inspired and just saying like, oh, hula, look, I didn't buy that plastic bottle, and they start doing it for me, but then eventually it starts clicking. So just like sharing our passion can be contagious, I feel. And so yeah, I think sometimes knowing a lot can be quite overwhelming, but then through what we know, we can inspire people that maybe don't know that much, and just like incept those little ideas, and just together we could just make a change, I think.
Shall I do my one before we close? I don't know how we're doing on time.
Yeah.
If we need to wrap up,
No, go ahead,
shout
Winnie.
at me, Deb.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so for me, again, it's kind of saying what a lot of other people have said, but it really is having these conversations with people from lots of different backgrounds and lots of different ways of approaching a problem, and you know, coming up with all these different solutions. So as a researcher, I tended to have most of my conversations with other scientists, and being part of eXXpedition, you open up to so many people from all over the world with their own ideas, their own backgrounds, their own perspectives, and their own approaches. And like Emily said, there's no one answer, and it really is this global approach of everyone being a part of that jigsaw puzzle and everyone contributing. So yeah, that's what gives me the hope and inspiration, is having all these different conversations and being fortunate to sail on a number of eXXpedition voyages in each of the countries that we stopped at, seeing the enthusiasm of the local people, and particularly the local children, at getting involved, asking questions, and telling us all the ways that they were acting, and learning about plastic pollution was just really inspiring, because these are the next generation.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody, so much. I guess I'll just leave you with my quick thought. I think for me, I'm inspired by the technology and the innovation that everybody is doing. You know, keep inventing new ways to find solutions to help save our oceans. If you're a young person, you know, reach out and get into STEM and engineering, and really think about unique and interesting ways to solve some of these problems and become part of the solution. And we just thank you, everybody, for joining us today. This is Schmidt Ocean Institute and eXXpedition, and we really enjoyed having you all today. Thank you so much for joining us.